My stomach was in knots already. I tried to make small talk for a few minutes to put off the inevitable. I wasn't very good at it. I tried to work into the topic as slowly as possible. This type of news doesn't go over well in general. My mom was going to be devastated.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Voices of Deconversion. Today I'm going to do a kind of unique episode. Normally I have a guest to interview, but today what I'd like to do is I'd like to share my story of coming out as an atheist to my mother, and then subsequently, when she told everybody, my family. So that's what I'll be talking about today. I actually wrote a little blog I wrote this out on my website, and I don't write very often, so I'm not experienced at this, and actually there's sometimes I feel like the words I use were silly, or it's not professional writing or something, but I just thought that I would read what I wrote to share that experience with you all. Some of you may have read it on the website, and that's fine. I've never read it before, and I just thought this is a good way to get another episode out. It saves some time not having to line up a guest and edit the conversation. So this is kind of a quicker way to get something out there. It's been about a month, I think, and since my last episode. That may be kind of the time frame that I'm going to be working with. In the future, it may be once a month I might put out an episode. I know that my update that I did many months back was that I wasn't kind of sure how I was going to fit the podcast into my new life with my new teaching and tutoring online. So I'm going to try this and see how this works. There was kind of a big break, and I'm hoping to kind of be a little bit more regular about getting episodes out. So for those of you who've emailed me or who are wondering, who haven't emailed me, that's kind of the goal. So before I share my story, let me just explain why I wanted to do this, other than the reasons I just mentioned. I've actually been getting, compared to the amount of episodes I've been producing in the last few months, I've actually been getting kind of a lot of emails, and there's been, I think, an increase in people listening. So the people that have been emailing me have been sharing stories, and I'm not going to share their stories. So I'm not I haven't asked their permission, so I'm not doing that. But what I thought I could do, that I get when I get emails, people often tell me about their story and about either what they're struggling with in having to fake it and not come out to parents or friends that they're atheist or agnostic, or just non-religious. So I get people telling me about that kind of thing. And then also people who have said the podcast has helped them, amongst other things, of course, but the podcast has been helpful for them in processing kind of their feelings about, leaving religion and leaving Christianity, and that it's been helpful. And so in hearing these stories, I'm always encouraged and moved and inspired every time I get an email like this. And if you email me, just know I read it almost immediately. I check my email every day or two. Sometimes I'm not totally consistent, but I will always read it, when I see them. I just don't reply right away. So I try to, and I usually put a little star by it so it flags it, so I'll notice it the next time I go in and check my email. But I'm just someone who has a hard time getting back to people consistently and quickly. Sometimes I'm really quick. Other times it might be, a few weeks. So obviously for many people who come out to their family as an atheist or a non-Christian when they're in a Christian family. For some people, I guess I'd say, it doesn't end well. Like the family doesn't respond well in one way or another. So this could take the form of like completely abandoning the person, kicking them out of their home. I've heard stories about that, like teenagers being kicked out when they came out to their parents. And I've also heard everything, less than that people, well, I guess worse than being kicked out, I guess, is being kicked out and then also being completely cut off from your family. There's, a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses have mentioned that, or other Christians, their families have just completely, I'm forgetting the word, but like abandoned them and like disowned them, essentially. Like they're not going to have any more contact with them. So, it can end badly, and I'm fully aware of that. And I don't want people to think that by reading this, I kind of end it on a positive note. And I don't want people to think that that's always the case, or that I think that's always the case, or that it will be for them, because we just don't know. And I'll talk about me kind of post coming out atheist and how it worked out for me later. But I don't want people to think that by reading this, I'm saying everything's going to be great and that, things will be so much better. But I think in my experience, this is anecdotal because this is my, my subjective kind of experience. The people that I've heard from and talked to in the Facebook groups I'm in, I think oftentimes it ends okay. Sometimes it ends great and the family's really receptive and maybe someone else in the family deconverted. And then everything in between that and completely being abandoned by your family. So it's really like anything in life, it depends on your circumstances and situation, how people will receive it, how you will be received. So I'm just sharing it, I guess, to encourage those who are either going through this and thinking about coming out to their family. Maybe it is appropriate for you in your life situation to do that. So I just want to be encouraging to you and let you know, like myself and many, many, many other people have felt those like stressful, anxious feelings, and have had to fake it for years and pretend that we were Christian, to get along with family, and that we understand how hard that is. So I think the reason I'm reading this is for that purpose, to just let people know that like we've been in your shoes. Our experiences may differ in degrees of experience, of difficulty, but we've all been there, so to speak. And also that we're here to support you. And we just want to encourage you in whatever kind of phase you're in with all of this. So for some of you, it may not be a good idea to come out. And I actually didn't come out as an atheist until, publicly, like on Facebook. I didn't do that until the podcast came out. And it was kind of subtle. It was like, hey, I created a podcast. It wasn't like, I'm an atheist. So I did that in 2017. So it's been 4 years since I did that. And I'll talk about how I feel about that later. Prior to that, it was just family and close friends that knew. So I really kept it a secret for many years. I didn't tell people at work, early on, for a long time. So I understand keeping it secret. And I didn't tell my grandmother when she was alive. There's just certain circumstances where you just can't tell family. So I understand that. And I think anyone who's gone through this understands that. And anyway, so with that being said, no matter whether you come out as an atheist or non-religious or agnostic to your family or not, the people that listen to this podcast, people in many atheist and agnostic Facebook groups, they all support you and they know what you're going through. So, okay, so before I read my blog post, just a quick update on how things are going for me and for my family. For Chrissy, her job's kind of, like many people, she's working from home and has been doing that for a while. And because of the coronavirus pandemic, like many of you. And so that's going good for her. And then as far as I go, I've adjusted to the teaching and the tutoring online. I gravitated more toward the tutoring because the hours were better. even though the pay wasn't. But that was important to me, and we were able to make it work. So I'm tutoring pretty much full time from home, and that's going really good. I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. And I finally applied to a graduate school in hopes of getting accepted and then being able to get a master's in teaching so then I can become a high school history teacher. So that's kind of my plan. And I'm waiting to hear back on that. And one funny thing that I thought I'd mention that many of you can empathize with is I was looking at different schools to apply to, and many of them are obviously religious. And even up here in the Pacific Northwest, we still have a lot of like religious colleges. So, and the one that I applied to, it was actually founded by, I think it was founded by Methodists, but in researching it, and so I was really discouraged at first, but then in researching it, I was able to find that it seems like it's a pretty secular university. It's a private school, so it's not public, which I kind of don't like. I really would prefer public. But they had the history program, they had in-person learning, which, once coronavirus is over, that's something I prefer, I think, to online learning, even though online learning is fine, and I might end up doing that anyway, depending on what happens. But anyway, I chose that school, the one that was like started religious but isn't really anymore. But it still bothers me, as an atheist. I don't like it. So I think all of you probably understand that feeling. But yeah, I was looking at like 3 or 4 different schools, and like one of them's public, and then like 3 of them are all religious, and so it's frustrating, living in this world of like where religion has kind of dominated our culture for so long. Okay. So with that being said, I just want to wish everyone well. I know that this has been a hard time for everybody with everything going on in the world. So I hope that your families are healthy and staying safe. Okay, let me go ahead and read my blog post about my mom. How I told my devout Christian mother I'm atheist. It is a night I will never forget. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot outside my apartment. I was about to make a phone call that would change everything. I couldn't help but wonder if at that very moment my mother was relaxing in her chair at home, watching a favorite TV show, or reading a favorite book. This is something she often did on weekend evenings. She was completely unaware of the bomb that was about to drop. At the same time, I was also in full control of whether the bomb would be dropped that night, the next night, or if it even dropped at all. I had certainly considered taking this secret with me to the grave, or at least keeping it with me for a few more years. Nothing was forcing me to tell her. On the other hand, suppressing my secret for another day, another week, or another year had become entirely unbearable. I had to say something. I grew up in a conservative Christian home. I can remember only a handful of times that our family did not go to church on a Sunday. God was a big part of my family's life. I remember as a child asking my mother many questions about God and the Bible. I remember asking her about the end times and when Jesus would return. I also remember asking her what God would think if someday I dated or married a Catholic girl. This was all hypothetical, of course, and had nothing to do with the cute girl who sat next to me in the 6th grade. Throughout the years, my mother was the one who I talked with about faith more than anyone else. Around the age of 15, I began to take my faith more seriously. I started to listen to Christian radio stations and borrowed a few of my mom's Christian cassette tapes. This was also around the time that I began reading the Bible on my own. By the end of high school, I was a deeply devout and passionate Christian. My faith was becoming my own, having been carefully guided and shaped by my parents through the years. By the age of 23, my wife and I were married with 2 children. Our decision to immediately have children was based on our belief that God did not intend Christians to use birth control. That is another story altogether. During this time, I was pursuing my bachelor's degree in biblical studies, with the intention of becoming a pastor. Needless to say, the course of my life seemed clear. There was nothing I was more certain about. It was inconceivable that just 2 years later, I would no longer consider myself a Christian. So there I was, sitting in my car and faced with telling my mother that I did not believe in God. As I mentioned previously, I didn't have to tell her that night. I didn't have to tell her at all. But I couldn't take it anymore. The previous Easter, I remember we had gone to my parents' house for the annual Easter egg hunt and dinner. As we were walking out the door, my mom chanted a familiar saying to my two young boys, "He has risen." The appropriate Christian response to this is to respond back, "He has risen indeed." However, I had not passed this mantra down to my children because I did not believe it to be true anymore. I made a comment to my mom at the moment that the boys had not learned this yet. By the way, quick side note, when my mom said that, my oldest son, who was about 5 years old, he turned around and goes, "What?" And it's one of my favorite memories. He had no idea what she was talking about. So anyway, I had not passed down the mantra to my kids. Okay, back to the blog here. I made a comment to my mom at the moment that the boys had not learned this yet. She thought nothing of it. They were only 3 and 5 years old at the time. It was this little exchange as we left her house that made it clear to me that I could not go on pretending for much longer. It was that, in addition to being asked to pray at weddings, family gatherings, etc. I felt so conflicted inside because on the one hand, I wanted to keep the peace in the family and let things continue as they had for many years. On the other hand, I felt like a fake by keeping this secret inside. I'm not good at pretending to be somebody that I am not. I knew the day would soon come when I had to be honest and let my family know that things had changed. A month after my 28th birthday, that day had come. Thanksgiving and Christmas were still a month or two away, and there was not another Hilliker family birthday for a while. In other words, it was a better time than most to break the news. I had given a lot of thought to timing. I wanted to give my mom a chance to process what I was telling her, and definitely not around a birthday or holiday. I had given some thought to telling her in person, but I decided if I told her by phone that this would provide her with the opportunity to hang up if things got overwhelming. I knew the conversation would not last incredibly long. In all honesty, it also would have been pretty difficult to tell her in person, for me. I was sitting alone in my car just waiting to get up the nerve to call. I had also recently been inspired to come out as an atheist when reading the book The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. At the end of the book, he takes time to encourage new atheists to come out. It motivated me and was the final push I needed to make the call. When she picked up the phone, she answered with such a warm and happy tone. "Hi, Stephen." My stomach was in knots already. I tried to make small talk for a few minutes to put off the inevitable. I wasn't very good at it. I tried to work into the topic as slowly as possible. This type of news doesn't go over well in general. My mom was going to be devastated. I eventually got up the nerve to say that my opinions about God and Christianity had changed. She asked me to clarify. Her tone began to sound concerned. It took me some time to respond. After a long-winded roundabout reply, I eventually got around to saying it. I don't believe in God anymore. Her response will be etched in my memory forever. "Stephen, you're breaking my heart." Truth be told, it was breaking my heart too. There was nothing in my mother's life that meant more to her than faith. To know that one of her children had left the faith was for her an unbearable thought. My news had blindsided her. It broke her heart. In that moment, I felt as if I had betrayed her. All these years later, it still feels so horrible when I think about it. What made it worse was my understanding that she was experiencing intense emotional pain and that I was the cause of that pain. I knew I had to be true to myself and to my opinions and feelings about God, but that did not lessen the crushing impact of that moment. She asked me to explain my reasoning, which I did in more detail than I think she was hoping for. My journey from faith to non-belief was very academic. After obtaining a 4-year degree in biblical studies, one thing was clear to me. The Bible was a very human book. I had knowledge of mistakes, errors, and human influences that for me prevented any misconception about the Bible being divinely inspired at all. For others, it may be the suffering they see in the world or an unanswered prayer, but for me, it ultimately came down to the facts about the Bible. Nevertheless, I still hold a very nostalgic feeling toward the Bible. Although that may seem peculiar to some, I enjoy reading it from time to time and have my favorite verses even today. One of these verses, in fact, helped me in my transition from Christian to non-believer. And by the way, before I read the verse, my feelings have lessened in this regard. I don't think quite so nostalgically about it anymore, but it's okay if people do, I think. So anyway, at the time, this is how I felt. Okay, so the verse was 1 Samuel 16:7. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. What this verse meant to me was that no matter what people would think of me and my new opinions, if God did exist, he would understand my heart, my motivations, and the sincerity of my doubts. I never doubted because I was upset with God. I never doubted because God didn't answer my prayers. I doubted because the Bible gave me reason to doubt. If there was a way that God could explain the human influences, errors, and mistakes, then I, of all people, was ready to listen. I had built my whole life, family, and career goals around the Bible. There was nothing more important to me than my relationship with God. I knew that God knew that too. I knew that he would surely understand my heart and the intellectual sincerity of my doubts. So I put my faith in the fact that God knew my questions came from a place of honesty. This is what I explained to my mother. If God exists, then he understands my doubts, and I am open to hear his answers. My mother didn't last much longer on the phone call. The emotional impact was intense on both ends of the phone. At some point, I remember her telling me that she needed to get off the phone. We quickly and uncomfortably said goodbye, and it was over. I simultaneously had feelings of relief and regret. I was relieved that the conversation had finally occurred, but I felt regret for the potential fallout and loss of relationship with my mother. At the moment, I had no idea what the impact would be on my relationship with my parents. Some parents refuse to speak to their children after a revelation like this. Other parents try their best to maintain the relationship, but they grow emotionally distant. I also had no idea how this would impact my other relationships in life. How would my sisters respond? How would my friends respond? I didn't like the idea of causing so much interpersonal turmoil. And a quick side note again, my dad called me the next day and we talked very briefly, but it was a much kind of different conversation with my dad, but it was, I don't remember how long it went, but he just had said that they were up all night, like crying. And so it was pretty bad that night. It was pretty rough. Okay, so back to the article. Fast forward 1 decade, and I'm happy to say that I still have a very close relationship with my entire family. My mother and I have only spoken on this issue twice since my phone call 10 years ago. This gives you an indication of how our relationship was most certainly altered, but thankfully not lost. I know that this is not the case for many atheists or agnostics who openly express their views to family and friends. To the lifelong non-believer, it makes no sense that an opinion about God's existence could so seriously threaten life's most important relationships. It is simply an opinion after all. But to the Christian, there's nothing worse than knowing a loved one who does not share a belief in God. No matter the good they do, no matter the love they share with others, to the Christian, this person is bound for eternal separation from God and eternal punishment in the most horrible place anyone could imagine. My mother lives with this reality anytime she is reminded that I'm an atheist. I can't imagine she thinks of these things for very long. When I considered the pain I would cause by revealing my true thoughts to her, I also knew that this pain for her would in some sense never go away. Having been a Christian, I understood that very well. Knowing what I know about the impact of that phone call on her and our relationship, was it really the right thing for me to do? Yes, it absolutely was. I actually think that she would say it was the right thing too. It was the right thing to do because it was the honest thing to do. Every worthwhile relationship in life is based in honesty. If I had not been honest, the closeness of our relationship would have been a deception. The fact that our relationship survived such a significant revelation says a lot. It says that my mother means a lot to me. I was determined to be honest even when it threatened our relationship the most. I was determined to be honest precisely because she meant so much to me. There's no compulsion to be transparent in a situation like this if the relationship is superficial. It says a lot about my mother too. To my mother, I am not an atheist. I'm her son. She loves me for the person I am, not for the opinions I have. In the end, what really matters are not opinions, but relationships. In exchange for this difficult, painful conversation, we gained a more honest understanding of one another. Differences exist in every relationship, in one form or another. What most of us want is simply to be understood and accepted by those we care about, in spite of our differences. As hard as it was for her, my mother did this for me, and for that I will always be grateful. Okay, so that's the article. Hope it was okay that I interjected a few times to give you updates or side comments. So I want to give a little bit of an update. So this was written 3 years ago. So I think some of my feelings have changed a little bit, and I'll try to explain. So I think that my parents and I are still very close, and I think my mother and I are still close and still on good terms. But it does feel like there was definitely some distance that was created there that wasn't there before. And so it's maybe not as rosy as it sounds. I don't know, but we still talk on a regular basis, and pre-coronavirus we would see them several times a month. So I think we always had kind of a close relationship. So I think, like, me with my parents. So I think that's kind of been retained for the most part. I think my relationship with my dad wasn't impacted like much at all. He's a different person, and he's a very religious, person too. One kind of interesting thing is my parents really don't go to church like they used to. And I just find it interesting. I don't know, that I think was happening before I came out to them as atheists, but I just find it interesting because when I was a kid, we had to go every single Sunday. There were like 2 times I think I can remember in my childhood where we didn't go. So, anyway, so that's kind of an update. My mom actually read this, soon after I posted it, 3 years ago. She told me that she had read it. Somehow she found it. So I don't know if she was following the podcast, or if she was following my website, or if someone else kind of clued her in, either way, I mean, I knew she could find it, and that's fine. But, at first, of course, it was kind of a shock, like, oh, she read it. Okay. So how do I feel about coming out now? Like, some of my opinion that I'm going to share is I think colored a little bit by the fact that, I am not working a really, really crappy job anymore. I was very unhappy in the career I was in, as I've mentioned before, for many years. That partly was caused by deconverting. And now I'm tutoring online, and I'm loving it. And I hopefully will be able to get a teaching certificate soon. And so I'm really excited about that, like within the next year or two. So I think I'm in a better place overall. And that obviously impacts how I feel about a lot of things as I look back. And it is hard sometimes to look back at the past and say, this is how I felt then, because it's hard to remember sometimes. And for me now, I deconverted a couple of years before I talked to my mom. So it was really like, deconverted in 2005. So it's been almost 16 years. In May, I remember the month. It was May when my wife said, "You're not a Christian anymore." May of 2005. So it's been 16 years. So it's been a long time. But I feel like way better about who I am as a person. I feel more comfortable in my own skin. I feel like I kind of went through the very excited to be an atheist phase, and was reading all the books and really digesting a lot of this stuff. And I think that's great, and that's fun. It's exciting. And I've talked before about how I was the one thing that was fascinating to me was the age of the earth and geology, because, as a conservative Christian, it was always taught to us that the earth was 6,000 years old. And, so it was just fun to learn actual science and actual knowledge, learn about actual knowledge and things that people actually knew about the earth. That was kind of what I did for a while. And then, I kind of settled in, and I would tell a few friends, when I got close to people, it would kind of come out that I wasn't religious, or, I might tell them I don't really believe in anything, but I was kind of evasive about it. I tried to avoid it. But as far as nowadays, my last job, I was pretty open with people. If it came up, I would just say like, yeah, I'm not religious. I think like all of you, or many of you, not all of you, for some of you, we avoid saying the word atheist because it sounds so harsh, and we're used to that being such a bad word. So I try to say it when I can, but I still feel like a little hesitant to use that word sometimes. So I understand how that feels. But anyway, I think overall, like I feel more confident, I feel better. And like I mentioned before, I know that's not the case for everybody. And if you've gone through this and it hasn't turned out well, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry, in the sense of like, that really sucks, and I know that sucks. and I wish that it hadn't been that way for you if you're that person. But like I also said earlier, there's a lot of us who have either gone through that type of experience where it didn't work out when they told family, or they've lost relationships, or for some of us maybe it worked out, but we know the pain of having to tell a family member, or even think about telling a family member. That internal turmoil is not good, I don't think, for your health. And it wasn't good for me, and I couldn't do it anymore. And I'm not saying that that's for everyone, but what I'm saying is that we know how that feels, and that if we can support you in any way, like the best way I know how is just by chatting with people who are in a similar place, or who have been in a similar place. Sorry. So there are many atheist groups online, and many good ones. So you can certainly look those up. But as far as Facebook groups go, there are several that I'm in. One of them is like ex-Christians, and then another one's Life After God, which was Ryan Bell's group, and then Everyone's Agnostic, or Everyone's Autonomous, which is Cass Midgley and Marie Delafonte's Everyone's Agnostic group. So, but I also have a small Facebook group that's secret, so it won't, or private or whatever, so that people can't see that you're in it. So if you want to be in that, I don't know a way to invite you to it unless we are already friends on Facebook, like personal, like, I send you a personal friend request, or you do that to me. And then once we're friends on Facebook, then I can invite you to the group. I don't know if that's changed, but I think that's how it has to be. So if you want to be in the group, feel free to send me a friend request. You can just look up Steve Hilliker. There are other Steve Hillikers out there, but not that many. And you can always email me if you have questions, if you can't find me on Facebook or Twitter or something. Twitter's great, I think, for some things, but as far as community goes, I think Facebook's better, even though there's things I hate about Facebook, like many of you. So, anyway, so feel free to reach out, and if you want to join a group, whether it's mine or another one, I think it's great. I think it helped me process stuff. I think it was really good for me to be talking to other atheists and agnostics. So I would, I guess, encourage anyone who is trying to work through deconversion and kind of the emotional impact of it, that's a good thing to do. So I think that's everything. Feel free to send me an email, steve@vodpodcast.com, or look up the Facebook group, Voices of Deconversion. And then, of course, I mentioned I'm on Facebook, but I am also, Voices of Deconversion is on Twitter. So you can, at VOD Podcast, you can look up Twitter, or look up the podcast on Twitter. I have a private Twitter that I use to mainly follow like actors I like and comedians and things like that, or sports teams or things. So I kind of don't follow other atheists too much on that, but on the Voices of Deconversion one, I follow like a bunch of atheists and stuff. So that's a good one if you want to follow the podcast, or if you want to contact me, feel free. And again, if you email me, I do read it, and I apologize if I haven't responded right away. And I truly am moved. Like every time I read one of those emails, it gets me so like inspired and touched. So believe me, if you've sent me an email, and I have read it, and I really appreciate it, and am grateful for you taking the time to share with me your experience. So with that being said, hopefully I'll be able to get an episode out here and there. I'm going to kind of aim for maybe once a month for now and see how it goes. And I hope all of you stay safe and are doing well, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast.